aren't able to be here live, they will be able to go back and take a look at the recording. And we'll post that on the CS for All Teachers website on our calendar. So you can go back to tonight's posting and find that webinar recording sometime tomorrow, or the very earliest on Friday, or the latest, I should say, on Friday. So with that taken care of, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you, Jennifer.
Can folks hear me? Okay, great. Want to make sure that people are hearing me. So thank you, Melissa, for inviting me to share our latest research with the CS10K group. I'm really excited to be able to share some of our latest data from the research. I think actually in the overview it says this is research from our upcoming reports, but that was before we released it, which we released these reports about 2 weeks ago. So it's our newest reports. So let me go a bit into kind of why we're doing this. So we know that computer science is important for all students. It provides critical skills for creativity, for problem solving, and so we believe it's a skill that all students should have the ability to learn, but there is a known lack of diversity in computer science. Specifically, for the study that we did, we're doing a multi-year study with Gallup, and this is the second year of our study, so the newest reports from the second year were just released a couple weeks ago. But we really wanted to understand awareness, perceptions, opportunities, and limitations in computer science education, particularly at the K-12 level. Since this lack of diversity, you know, we see this at all levels, at university, in careers, but we wanted to understand what was going on earlier at the K-12 level. So we surveyed in the second year over 16,000 students, parents, teachers, principals, and superintendents. And in the first year, we surveyed almost 16,000 as well, so roughly the same numbers. And they're actually not necessarily the same samples either. For the students, they were in grades 7 through 12. Parents are parents of students in grades 7 through 12. And then the educators were grades 1 and K through 12 educators. For the students and parents also, we wanted to target a minimum number of Black and Hispanics so that we could do some analyses by race and ethnicity to really try to understand what are some of the differences that are happening for those groups. So these 5 groups all came from across the U.S. and they're nationally representative samples. So in terms of demographics, geography, socioeconomic status, et cetera, they're nationally representative. So the first thing that I want to cover from our study is that in the first year, we actually found really positive perceptions and positive value of computer science among all the populations. And this was actually surprising to me when I was reviewing the survey results. I didn't expect to see such positive perceptions of computer science. But in fact, we found particularly for students and parents, the perceptions were really, really positive. So about 90% of students and parents agree with statements like people who do computer science work on fun and exciting projects. People who do computer science make things that help improve people's lives. We also saw really high value of computer science, and in the second year, that high value really persists, particularly for parents. So 84% of parents say that computer science is at least as important as required classes like math, science, history, and English. And in fact, 24% of the parents, about a quarter of the parents, thought that computer science is more important than these required classes. Parents in particular just really highly value computer science. 93% of parents say that offering computer science is a good use of school resources, and 9 in 10 want their child to learn computer science. And educators also thought that computer science was very valuable. 60% of administrators and teachers agreed that computer science should be required when available. And a majority of them also agreed that computer science is at least as important as the required classes. But the challenge that we're seeing is that the access to these computer science learning opportunities is not yet universal. So this year we saw 40% of principals, K-12 principals, report having computer science classes with programming coding. And this is actually an increase from the first year of our study, where we found that 25% of principals agreed with it. So that's actually a really big jump. But the challenge is this is still not everybody. It's not 100% yet, and it's not even half of schools who say they offer computer science learning opportunities. So with that, we also looked at some of the discrepancies in this access that does exist and the exposure that the students are getting. We found that when we looked at race and ethnicity, Black and Hispanic students actually have less exposure to computers and technology. So I'm going to use this little pointer to help because I have a lot of charts coming up. So on the very left here, you can see the Hispanic students in the gray bars there. Only 49% of them said that they knew an adult who worked with computers or technology, compared to 65% of Black students and 68% of white students. So Hispanic students are significantly less likely to really, in a sense, understand or to know a role model in technology. And then when we're looking at the right two bars there, what we're seeing, or right two sets of bars, what we're seeing is that Black and Hispanic students are less likely to use a computer at school every day compared to white students, and also they're less likely to use a computer at home every day. Significantly less likely to use a computer at home every day compared to white students. So that's only 30% of Black students, 26% of Hispanic students compared to 45% of white students who use a computer at home every day. And we actually found that frequent computer usage is related to interest in computer science. We did look at mobile device usage, cell phone and tablet usage, and it's actually really high among all the students with no significant difference between these groups. So it's about 3/4 of students say that they use a cell phone or tablet every day. In terms of access to computer science classes, we found that Black students in the yellow bars here are less likely than white students to say that they have access to dedicated computer science classes, so this left-hand set of bars, and also less likely to say that they have access to classes, other classes where computer science is taught. And it does look like here that they're less likely than Hispanic students to have access to these classes, but actually when you control for income and parents' education, this difference is no longer significant. So I see a couple questions coming in, and I might not be able to get to all of them, and I'll pause for questions as well throughout the presentation. But sorry, I didn't mention what year this data is from. This data is from 2015 to 16 school year data. And then the first year of the study was 2014-15 school year data. So it's only a year difference between year 1 and year 2. So in terms of where students are learning computer science, of those students who have learned computer science, we see some differences in where and how students are learning computer science by demographic as well. So Black and Hispanic students are actually more likely than white students to learn computer science in out-of-classroom environments, like after-school clubs or groups. So on the second to right set of bars right there, you see that Black and Hispanic students are more likely than white students to learn computer science in a group or a club, and this is at school. Black students are also more likely to learn computer science in a formal group outside of school compared to white students. But the interesting thing here that we're seeing is that of the students who have learned computer science, so this question was only asked of students who have learned computer science, the majority of them, 80% of them, at least 80% of them, are learning it through a class at school, and this is regardless of their race or ethnicity. So this is huge. This is 80% of students who have learned computer science are learning it in a class at school compared to the next most common way, which is just 50% or under 50% for the rest of the ways that students are learning computer science. So in a sense, this suggests that access through classes is probably the best way to reach the most students and the broadest set of students as well. So when we look at by gender, what we're seeing is that girls are actually less aware of computer science learning opportunities outside of the classroom. So specifically in the yellow bars here, you can see that 39% of girls say that they know about groups or clubs at the school where they can learn computer science compared to 48% of boys. We also see that 51% compared to 51% of girls compared to 58% of boys know about opportunities in their community to learn computer science. And then in terms of websites, we see that 62% of girls compared to 69% of boys know about specific websites where they could learn computer science. And so it's not surprising to see that boys are actually more likely than girls, one, to have learned computer science, and also more likely than girls to have learned it on their own. So you can see for all these opportunities that are outside of a class at school, boys are more likely than girls to have learned it through these other means, particularly learning on their own. And then again, when we look at what is the most common way students are actually learning it, by gender, we also see it's in a class at school. 80% of students, regardless of gender, regardless of race or ethnicity, are most likely to learn it through a class at school. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions. I'll also, if anyone wants to chime in, I'll also read through the chat questions too. So someone asked, any points plotted on the U.S. map? So it was 16,000 respondents across the U.S., so we don't have specific, I guess, cities or longitude data points about where these participants are coming from, but they are representative of the U.S., so the more populous areas will have more respondents compared to the less populous areas. And then I see a question, how did you define CS in the study of computer science? So I will jump ahead to the end. Here we go. So for the first year of the study, we actually asked the students, parents, teachers, and principals which activities they considered computer science, and we listed 4 different activities. 2 of them were computer literacy activities like searching the internet or creating presentations, and then the other 2 were computer science activities. So immediately after that question, we gave them this definition of computer science, which is roughly based on the CSTA definition, just simplified a bit. And then throughout the survey, we reminded them several times, multiple times, about what computer science is. And then in the second year of the survey cycle, we didn't ask them about computer science, what they thought computer science was at the beginning. We just gave them the definition right away. So this is the definition that we gave, and again, we've repeated this multiple times throughout the survey. We also, in developing the surveys, did cognitive interviews to make sure the respondents would understand the questions as we were trying to ask them. And from that, we got a sense that people were really understanding that computer science was not just typing or searching the internet or other computer literacy activities. And I think that also answers another question that was just asked. Any other questions?
Remember, we encourage you to use your voice, ask questions here. We'll certainly have other opportunities throughout the session, but if there's anything that you've heard so far that you have a question or comment about, we'd love to hear that.
Hi. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, you probably can. This is Mandy Honeyman. I was just curious about the numbers of principals and administrators that you surveyed in comparison to the number of, if you like, users. So shall we say teachers, students, and parents. It seemed as though it was heavily weighted in favor of getting some statistics from principals and administrators. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so let me go back to numbers so people can see. So I didn't mention actually, but for the student, parent, and teacher populations, these surveys were done over phone. So Gallup called these folks. So in terms of that, the reach was not as scalable, but for the principal and superintendent surveys, we actually emailed them out, so they were online surveys. And for the principal survey in particular, we wanted to target a greater number of principals because they really, in a sense, represent the schools across the U.S. So we actually gave monetary incentives for the principals for taking the survey, and it was a lottery amount. So not every principal got it, but they could be entered to win the amount for their school. Okay, so I think I'll go on. I have a couple more breaks for questions, or I think one more break for questions, and then of course questions at the very end. So in terms of what we're seeing, and it's, in a sense really could help explain the discrepancy in learning of computer science by gender. We're seeing discrepancies in encouragement. So boys overall are more likely to have been encouraged and also to see people that they identify with that's engaged in computer science activities. So you can see here 39% of boys compared to 26% of girls say that a teacher has told them they would be good at computer science. 46% of boys compared to 27% of girls say that a parent has told them they would be good at computer science. And then we asked students about if they'd seen someone engaged in computer science in the media, and that could be online, in TV and movies, and something that they read. So of those who saw someone doing computer science in the media, how often do they see someone that's like them? And you can see 21% of boys said that they saw someone like them compared to just 11% of girls. And so overall what we're seeing is that just boys receive more encouragement than girls from teachers, parents, and the media. So they're 1.5 times more likely to be told by a teacher they would be good at computer science compared to girls, and 1.7 times more likely they would be told by parents that they would be good at computer science, and then they're almost twice as likely to often see someone like themselves doing computer science in the media. So overall, what we're seeing are some complex barriers for girls, blacks, and Hispanics. We see structural barriers, particularly for black and Hispanic students. So in terms of access to computer science classes, black students are less likely than white students to have access to these classes. And with exposure to technology, Hispanic and black students are less likely than white students to use a computer at home every day. In terms of some of the social barriers that we're seeing, we see that there's a lack of awareness of computer science opportunities for girls, particularly outside of classes, outside of school classes. And then encouragement. Girls are less likely to be told by a teacher or a parent that they'd be good at computer science. And in the media, they're also less likely to see someone that's like them, that's engaged in computer science in the media. So what we're kind of seeing with that, and potentially as a result of these barriers, is discrepancies in interest and confidence. And so, not surprisingly, we see that boys are more interested in learning computer science, and they're also more confident in learning computer science. So you can see in these red bars here, boys, 34% of boys are very interested in learning computer science compared to just 16% of girls. So they're more than twice as likely as girls to say that they're very interested in learning computer science. So given, the less encouragement that they receive, given, less people that they identify with doing computer science in the media, it's not surprising that girls are less likely to say that they're very interested. And you can also see here, 24% of girls say that they're not at all interested in learning computer science compared to just 13% of boys. So almost twice as many girls say that they're not at all interested in learning computer science. And then when we're looking at confidence, again, not surprising, 65% of boys say that they're very confident they could learn computer science compared to just 48% of girls. And we actually see that students who are confident that they could learn computer science are 3 times more likely to be very interested in learning computer science. And then similarly, when we asked about how likely students are to have a job where they would need to know some computer science, boys are more likely than girls to say that they're very likely to have a job, 35% of boys compared to just 22% of girls. And again, students who say that they're likely to have a job are more likely to be interested in learning computer science. On the other hand, what we're seeing is that Black and Hispanic students are actually more likely than white students to be very interested in learning computer science. In fact, Black students are 1.5 times as likely as white students, and Hispanics are 1.7 times as likely as white students to be very interested in learning computer science. So this is a huge contrast compared to the lesser exposure and access they have to computer science and computers in schools and at home. Specifically, what we're seeing is that in terms of student interest, we see that 31% of Black students and 35% of Hispanic students are very interested in learning computer science compared to just 21% of white students. And then in terms of likelihood to have a job where they would need computer science, 34% of Black students and 38% of Hispanic students say that they're very likely to have a job where they would need to know computer science compared to just 26% of white students. And then we see similar trends with parents too, and actually even more extreme trends. 35% of Black parents and 53% of Hispanic parents say that it's very likely that their child will learn some computer science in the future. And this is compared to just 24% of white parents. So more than twice, or about twice as many Hispanic parents say that, compared to white parents, say that their child will learn some computer science in the future. And this is huge because we see for Black and Hispanic students in general, they have less exposure to computers and technology and to computer science classes. We also see some interesting trends by confidence. Black students are more likely than white or Hispanic students to say that they're very confident that they can learn computer science. So I'll pause again for any questions at this point, and then I think I just have one more section and we'll be done. I think I got all the questions in the chat, so if there are any questions, people can speak up as well.
I'll speak up again because I don't have problems speaking up. Did you also split up those last figures according to gender?
These figures, yeah. So this is the one by gender.
Yep. And then did you? But the ones that so 2 slides further on, where you're talking about, yeah, that one. Yeah. So there, do we know these? Do we know whether, yeah.
Yeah, these first 3 sets of charts here are the ones that I just showed 2 slides ago for gender.
Yes, what I'm saying, but they didn't include white, Black, and Hispanic differentiation between gender. So what I'm wondering is that 68% of, for example, students who are confident they could learn CS, how many of those are boys and how many of those are girls?
Yeah, so you're asking about the intersection between them. So we didn't do that.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we didn't do that just because the numbers do get really small at that point.
Right.
Since we only had about 200 Black students.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah. I see a question, better or worse. I'm not really sure what that's referencing.
Is there any indication that this is improving?
In terms of, you mean these measures here, confidence, interest?
Yes.
Likelihood to have a job? So I'm trying to think if we looked at it compared last year to this year. We did have slightly different questions between the 2 years. So actually the interest question we didn't ask last year. I think for these, and I can double check on this as well, I think for these they're relatively the same. If anything, they're in an upward trend, but I think they're pretty much the same from the first year to the second year.
It seems that we have a little bit more interest from students, but I don't know if it's because it was never recognized as interest before, or because since it's playing in the media more, people are being more vocal about it.
Yeah, I would say overall, just from observing the whole computer science education landscape, particularly in the U.S. and even worldwide, it definitely has been on the rise. There's been a lot more media attention. There's been a lot more exposure. I mean, President Obama made an announcement for CS for All, so that's huge publicity there. And I think, I've attended the CSTA conference as well, the Computer Science Teachers Association conference, and I just meet more and more teachers who are starting to teach computer science. So I definitely do see this growth in the area. And I mean, with our numbers too, where we saw 40% of principals saying that they offer a computer science class with programming and coding compared to just 25% a year ago, that's a huge growth. So there's some growth happening. We don't know exactly what the quality of that growth looks like yet. So that's definitely something we intend to explore.
Jennifer, could you go back to the slides about people seeing, or students seeing themselves in the media, or seeing computer scientists in the media? The percent for boys and girls was both about 21 and 11%. I don't really have a question. That really struck me at how low that number is for boys and for girls. That they only see people as computer scientists in the media, 21% boys and 11. That seems very low.
So this is, so to clarify, there were two questions. The first question was if students had seen anyone doing computer science in the media. So we had, I think it was about 3 different questions asking about 3 different types of media. So, in movies, on TV, or those might have been 2 actually, in movies, another one on TV, and another one online. And then so of the students who answered that they saw people doing computer science in the media, we asked them this question that's shown right here. Of the people that you see or read about in the media, how often do you see people like you doing computer science? So this is how many students are seeing that they identify with doing computer science. And kind of what we were seeing from the cognitive interviews was that oftentimes students were actually identifying mostly, or not identifying, but associating people who do computer science with kind of really smart or nerdy types. And students would say, oh, I'm not smart, or, I'm not a geek, so no, I don't identify, or I don't see people like me doing computer science. So that's kind of anecdotally what we think may be happening there.
Yeah, that really strikes me. That really tells me that, the stereotype of who a computer scientist is has not changed all that much. There's, it seems like there's an interest, but the stereotype of who's actually successful at it has not broadened to, anyone in society.
Exactly. There's a huge idea. The big shock is the positive perceptions that students and parents have about computer science, the nature of computer science and the work of computer science. Like 90% of students say that people who do computer science work on fun and exciting projects, and 90% are saying that they work on things that help improve people's lives. But when it comes to actually embodying themselves as doing computer science, they really don't identify with those types. And that's a huge contrast and really interesting thing that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
And we're all, and the other surprising thing too is we thought maybe race or gender might have a role with who they're identifying as doing computer science, but I think just anecdotally, and this isn't, a huge sample size, but just anecdotally what we've heard is more of the geeky stereotype comes through more than rather like I don't see a woman portrayed as doing computer science, or I don't see someone who's Black doing computer science, and that's why I don't identify with it. I think our guess and our hypothesis is that the geeky stereotype is more pervasive. And I'll just add also, we did ask last year in our report, which is the Images of Computer Science report on our website, we did ask students and parents about who they saw doing computer science in the media, and there we did see it was mostly male and mostly white and some Asian, and then someone wearing glasses, because we didn't want to associate a negative word, so we used wearing glasses. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll go on and finish up, and then I'll leave time for questions at the end as well. So in terms of limitations and barriers to access, this was something that we wanted to explore because, you know, we saw that there was really high value of computer science among parents and educators, particularly parents. I mean, we saw 90% of them wanted their child to learn computer science, and particularly Black and Hispanic and lower income parents were even more likely to have value of computer science learning. So one of the things that we saw that was in contrast to that, and also mention, we found this really high value of computer science last year as well, but we also found a huge discrepancy that administrators, principals, and superintendents, less than 8% of them thought that parent demand for computer science was high. That's less than 8%, so it's a really small number compared to the 90% of parents who actually wanted their child to learn computer science. So this year we wanted to explore why that was, you know, are parents speaking up? So we asked them, and we found out actually less than 3 in 10 parents have explicitly expressed support for computer science to school officials. So there is, you know, some sort of disconnect in terms of communication between the parents and educators here that we're seeing. Parents think computer science is important. They want their child to learn it, but they're not necessarily speaking up and demanding it from educators. And from the educator side, maybe they're not talking to parents to understand, you know, what parents actually want their child to learn. So that's one of the discrepancies that we're seeing, and so there could be a lot more work done in this area as well. And the next thing I'll go over is some of the barriers. So we asked administrators about the biggest barriers to offering computer science. So we asked, you know, principals who do not offer computer science, what are some of their biggest barriers? And then we asked principals who do offer computer science, what were the biggest barriers that they had to overcome? And we found similar barriers between the first year and the second year as well. It's test prep for other subject areas and lack of teachers trained in computer science. But we actually found some opportunities coming from these barriers as well. We found that 7 in 10 principals agree that it's a good idea to incorporate computer science into other subjects, and you know, a majority of teachers also agreed with this. And then actually 3 in 5 teachers say that they're willing to spend their own time to learn more about computer science. So with this, you know, to help handle the need to devote resources and time to other subject areas, there's an opportunity to introduce computer science learning into these other subjects. And then with the lack of teachers trained in computer science, we can see that a majority of teachers are willing to spend and dedicate their own time to learn about computer science, including, I'm sure, many of the folks here on the call. So we should increase awareness and support of teacher training in computer science to take advantage of this interest that we're seeing. And I see a question, were those elementary, middle, or high school principals that agree it's a good idea? So it's all of the above. It's K-12 principals that we asked. And so some of the other recommendations that we have as well, especially thinking about the discrepancies that we're seeing by gender and by race and ethnicity, is to be really thoughtful with the CS images, the images of computer science, the images of people doing computer science, and especially who you support towards computer science. So, you know, it's not necessarily someone who's exceedingly good at math and science that's the only person that can succeed at computer science, for instance, or it's not necessarily the stereotype of someone geeky or nerdy, or it's not necessarily the most common group currently in computer science, males, white or Asian. So just kind of being more inclusive and thoughtful about the images of computer science that you're portraying and who you're supporting towards computer science. And then also be sure to try to understand the different circumstances that students may be coming from. You know, for instance, we saw that Black and Hispanic students are less likely than white students to use a computer at home every day. So they may not have that extra practice and extra access at home that other students are having. So understand that just because they've never done computer science before, they've never used computers in certain ways before, doesn't mean that they can't excel in computer science. So just really understanding that everybody comes from different backgrounds and they may have access to different resources. So with that, these are the two reports that we just released, Diversity Gaps in Computer Science, and then Trends in the State of Computer Science in U.S. K-12 Schools. The Diversity Gaps report covers some of the differences that I covered here and goes more in depth among girls, Blacks, and Hispanic students. And then the Trends in the State of Computer Science report goes into some of the changes that we saw between the first year and the second year of the study, as well as some of the new insights from some new questions that we asked. And you can access those reports on our website right there, g.co/CS-EDU research. And with that, I'll take any other questions. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. I wanted to start my webcam so people could feel like they're talking to a real person if they were asking questions. Okay. Tim asked about hour of code impact. Tim asked about hour of code impact. So that's something we have not looked at because this was just a broad survey at this point. For this, actually I'll mention, for our last cycle, we're actually waiting a year before we do this last cycle just because so much has changed in the computer science education world, particularly at the K-12 level. So we're taking a gap year to reassess what the landscape looks like and to talk with all of our stakeholders and understand what the needs are in the space. So we'll be talking to teachers, to education organizations, to other educators, to students to really understand what the changing landscape needs are. So one of the things that we're also wanting to explore more is the quality of those computer science offerings. So when you know, educators say that they're incorporating computer science into their courses, is it because they're doing an hour of code for 1 hour during the entire school year? Or is it keyboarding even? Are they still thinking that that's computer science? Or is it something more extensive? So we really want to understand what that range looks like and how in-depth the content goes and how rigorous and what the quality of that content looks like.
Will you also be looking at...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, will you also be talking to universities, education prep programs to see what they're doing for computer science education, you know, pedagogy, everything that needs to go with, you know, really training people to be computer science teachers?
Yes, definitely. So we've been in touch with a group here that actually funds CS teacher prep programs. And so one of the big questions that we've gotten also is actually looking at the quality and all the sources of teacher prep that already exist out there and how teachers can navigate those resources as well. And so we'll definitely be talking to the providers there, and we also see an increase in number of providers in that area as well. We actually just put out an RFP for pre-service CS teacher training, and there was way more interest in that than we expected. So it's definitely a growing area that we're in touch with.
Yeah, and the quality of those programs. You know, are they
Yes.
just teaching the content, or are they actually teaching pedagogy and, you know, how to
Yep.
teach, you know, methods classes, that type of stuff?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. I look forward to that.
And I saw a question for a comment about states. So I also do want to mention on our website, you'll see we have reports by state as well for the states that we had enough principal respondents. So those are generally the most populous states there. And we're actually planning to combine the data from the first year and the second year, so hopefully we can get more states included in our state reports. And I see a question, interested in the impact of AP computer science programs. So again, I think that's something that we'll continue to look at as well in terms of the quality of computer science offerings. I think the College Board may have more detail on the impact of the AP computer science program. Salaries are not competitive. I think that's alluding to teacher salaries compared to a job in the tech industry, and I would agree with that. I don't know if there's further to that question. Link for the teacher preparedness. So that's not a study yet, but we are working to fund teacher prep programs. And so that was just a request for proposals that we put out. And so we just received a bunch of submissions for teacher prep programs. Yes, it just closed a couple weeks ago. But I think given the interest, and I've talked to many other folks, and I think people are still reaching out about it as well, I think given the interest, we'll need to reassess kind of where we'll go with that program, because this is our first time doing it. And as I said, we just were not expecting that many and that much interest. So we will definitely reassess, and I can reach out to Melissa with details if we do reopen something in that area.
Where do we go from here, and how do we make use of what you have accomplished here by collecting this information?
Yeah, great question. So I think a lot of this, part of the motivation of doing this is there was just not comprehensive data out there about what the landscape of computer science looks like at the K-12 level. So that's kind of the first huge part of why we even did this study in the first place. I think the second piece of what we're trying to do too, and we would love any help from any of you, is to help get this data to policymakers as well, and administrators, and those who kind of can affect change from the top down. So getting this in front of those folks to understand, hey, there's this huge interest, there's this huge demand, people think it's really important. Now, how do we allocate the resources to support computer science classes at schools? So I think that's one of the big key pieces that we're working on there. And the second piece, I think, is really to help educators and parents understand what the situation looks like for these different groups, so that they can encourage students to pursue computer science and not make assumptions about students based on, their demographics, for instance. And I think that's another key piece that we wanted to get out there, is to really understand why is there underrepresentation of certain groups, and what are potential solutions that we can uncover from these insights. So that's something that we'll continue to work on too. And again, I'm open to any suggestions or collaboration among any folks here as well. And then in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, we're going to do the reassessing of the landscape and, you know, interviewing and talking with folks to understand where we can go with the research to provide data and insight that will be useful for broadening computer science education.
What steps are being taken to encourage business and industry to more effectively demand that they start getting some workforce from the schools who are more highly educated in this area? Waiting for a school system to push through something is like snail mail versus email. And we need these kids to be competitive in today's market when they graduate in May.
Yeah, there's I don't have a good answer to that, honestly. It's a complex situation because we've also gotten pushback. Us being Google, you know, a big corporate company, we've gotten pushback that, you know, people don't want to see Google and other corporations controlling what kids learn in school as well. So there's kind of a delicate balance and dance there where ultimately, I mean, our goal is to make sure that all students have access to these learning opportunities. And I think I don't know of a good solution to that, which is, I mean, part of the reason why there isn't one out there yet. But I think, you know, we need to find ways to work together. And I think the cross-disciplinary collaboration that you suggested is key to that. And so we are working with, as I mentioned, you know, teacher service providers, teacher pre-service providers, and education organizations and advocacy groups to help try to make this change happen. But I think it's, you know, we all need to work in our different ways and also collaborate and work together.
Some of the greatest collaboration I've seen is with some of our online courses related to these topics with Google has some online educational tools available for students and teachers. Khan Academy has some things. Code.org is supported by a lot of industry. So I see us going down and having industry kind of encourage and push us through. But when you're in smaller school districts that can't support that, nor can bring the staff in for that, we have to step out of and let people know that you can step out of a traditional educational environment and have a hybridized approach, a MOOC approach, or a specific online course, a book approach, one or the others, and some of those things are things that we need to encourage. And I think it's the industry that's going to have to pursue it, push it, or demand it. I've been in education long enough. It just doesn't come from within for the educational system.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Hi, I have actually a question that maybe I need some advice. I'm hoping that maybe you can help me. I work in a high school in New York City, and I started doing computer science this year. I did ECS. I'm doing ECS, and then I'm also doing an AP ECS class. Do you have any suggestions on like a course of sequence for 9th through 12th grade? I'm finding that the ECS is really very uninteresting to my older kids, and I'm thinking it should be more of a middle school class, but I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think ECS, I mean, I'm not the expert in the curriculum, so I would not take my word alone. I think you should talk with other folks who teach. But I think ECS generally is targeting kind of the middle school 9th grader age, kind of more of the intro level, so that does make sense that the older students are not as interested. What I've seen before as course sequences are the AP Computer Science Principles course can come after that, and then the AP Computer Science A course can come after that. I don't know, I'm sure there are other teachers here who have their own sequence, so feel free to speak up as well.
Thanks so much.
I see someone else mention ECS equals middle school.
We're coming to the end of our time together. Are there any other last questions that anyone has? I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to read what you wrote because I wasn't sure if the person who asked that question can see the chat or not. So Melissa had said there are lots of great resources out there on ECS. Gail Chapman and Joanna Good are always happy to answer your questions as well. And then someone shared a link, csforallteachers.org/exploring-computer-science, which I assume has also a bunch of great resources.
Yes, thank you for that, Jennifer. I appreciate it. I did want to go ahead and being mindful of the time here and mention several upcoming activities. As many of you know, we have rebranded ourselves from the CS10K community to CS for All Teachers as we're embracing a larger population of teachers that we know need support with computer science education. There are a number of things that we have planned just in the month of November. So actually tomorrow night, there will be another webinar. This one is focused on how to prepare for CS Education Week, which is coming up in December. Colin White from TFA and actually maybe 3 teacher leaders are going to join and share their ideas about how to prepare for the week and get things started. Then later in the month, we are going to have 2 other sessions. On the 16th, as a follow-up on preparing for CS Ed Week, this time with Colleen Lewis of CS Teaching Tips. She's going to share some tried and true methods and tips that she's gathered through the years on working with volunteers in the classroom during CS Ed Week. And then finally, Gail Chapman actually of ECS is going to do a session on diversity does not equal equity and looking at some issues somewhat specific to ECS, but actually goes much broader to that and thinking about the practices and recruiting strategies that you use to try to help computer science become much more available and broaden that participation. So you can find more information about all these activities on the link that I just provided in the chat window on the CS for All Teachers website. It's our calendar, and you're able to go, and each of those events will give you the link to be able to access the login and all of that. So we thank you all for being here with us tonight and look forward to seeing you again at some point later in the month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.